Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arno, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
Hey, Andrew, looks sunny in Toronto.
It is sunny in the winter. For me, as long as the sun is out, I'm good. It doesn't matter how cold it is. I just can't stand the gray and the darkness. And it looks like it is sunny over in Edmonton.
I think so. The deep freeze, someone's just turning the deep freeze a little bit warmer, but it's still pretty cold out here. It was been like minus 30 plus wind chill stuff all last week. So
Yeah.
I think, be able to get out of the house a little bit more this weekend.
And I think speaking of getting out of the house, living in Edmonton, I think really taught my wife and I to really try and get out no matter what, because there's way less sunlight. And if you're just cooped up inside all the time, I think it gets really hard. So that's where my wife learned to ski as an adult. And this is something that we've continued to do with the kids. We had them out on skis when they were 2 or 3 years old, and we've continued to just get out there. But speaking of the winter, though, it's pretty timely because I don't know about your practice, Dave, but in ours, we certainly see an uptick of referrals.
Absolutely. I think we could do a whole podcast on the seasonal affective concerns that come with winter or less sunlight. But I think you were talking about getting out of the house, and I was thinking in terms of this episode and what is therapy or what therapy can be like. I know for a lot of people, when they're struggling, they can isolate, and therapy can be that breaking the isolation and connecting with someone else, getting out of the house. So that might be a nice segue into what we were going to focus on today.
Absolutely. It's definitely the idea of connecting with somebody. If we go back 4 or 5 years ago when the pandemic was happening, so many new referrals of people feeling isolated, not having that connection. And pretty much at the first opportunity to go back into in-person therapy, it happened. And people wanted to have that human connection. So therapy, I think, at the root of it is really making a human connection, an emotional connection, even if you're not speaking about emotions directly. There is a connection, there's a bond of some sort.
Yeah, and I'm just going to pick up on that. But before I go too far, for the new people listening today, we're going to be talking about if you're contemplating going to therapy or thinking about going to therapy for the first time, or if you went to therapy and it wasn't a good experience and maybe you're thinking of revisiting it. We're hoping to share some information from a couple practicing psychologists in terms of what therapy can be like, picking up on what you were saying. The human connection. I think for some people that is a major part of it. The healing, the growth, the progress that can be made is really a human connection element. And I think for some people, they're looking for tools, they're looking for strategies, things that they can apply to their life. And they're not too keen on making a long-term relationship with a therapist. So having self-help books or even the video or phone sessions that we can have now, for some people, that's enough. That's what they're looking for. Different people are looking for different elements, but connecting with someone that you feel comfortable with, that you feel safe with, that you feel cares about you is a huge part of therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes across the population when it comes to therapy with children, teenagers, adults. I know in Ontario, there's a bigger emphasis on specializing with certain populations, whereas it was really neat studying out in Alberta, a lot more of a generalist model.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me opportunity to refine my skills as a therapist, building relationships with children, with teenagers, with adults. And I tell people all the time now, because I have supervisees and trainees who work with me, there are so many translatable skills across these populations. So if you can practice with children, you can use some of those skills. Perhaps it's using more playful language at times with an adult, right? If somebody is really serious and you want to inject a little bit of playfulness, a little bit of humor, right? You can do that. And at the same time, if you're good with working with adults, you get a really serious teenager coming in, and way more mature than their age, you can speak to them like an adult.
Yeah, I think from a client's perspective, someone trying this out, they want to get really clear about what they want different in their life or what they're hoping for, because then that can really guide the process. I think if you know what the target is, it's easier to hit it. But sometimes people are just confused and not sure where to go or what to do. They just want to feel better. You can start there, but the more clarity you have around, there's a miracle question in one of the therapeutic approaches, and they say if you had a magic wand and you woke up the next day and everything was better, what would be different in your life? And
Yep.
that can kind of help clarify what you're going for.
Yep. And I think as a psychologist working with individuals and they do show up, they just feel discomfort. Oftentimes we'll get the response of, I don't know why, right? Seemingly everything is great. So I don't know why I'm sad. I don't know why I'm anxious. And I think it's important for us to understand that as psychologists, that's our job to tease apart what is happening and to start gaining an understanding. And I think there are times, even on a first session, for me, it may on the inside feel like I'm scrambling a little bit
Hmm.
because you're meeting this person for the first time. They may be nervous, but I think it's important for everyone to know that as a therapist, we might be having some nerves too. Right.
I'm laughing, Andrew, because yesterday I had two new clients. I try not to have new clients in the same day, like two or three, just for that reason. I went home last night and I was getting ready to leave to do the men's group that I do, but I had to put some deodorant on because I told my wife I had two new clients today. I was sweating way more than usual. So, of course, meeting new people, trying to figure out what we're doing together, there's a higher level of anxiety, at least for me, because there's that uncertainty. And I'm sure for clients too, like just walking into the room for the first time or signing into the video session for the first time, there's a different vibration of energy in the room oftentimes.
Yeah, and we want to put our best foot forward too, right? And so, walking out, meeting the person for the first time, we don't know what they look like. We don't know how they're going to present one-on-one. But the thing that really amazes me about the therapeutic process is that for the first couple of appointments for a new client, you may have somebody who is nervous, who may not seem very open. But as you build that relationship, you start to oftentimes, I won't say every single time or with every single client, but I would say the majority of clients, you start to see the softening around the edges, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's different approaches and views on things, so take this with a grain of salt. But a lot of our, I call them like life strategies, right? Like how are we in the world with other people? How do we feel good about ourselves? How do we feel like we've achieved something? Like there's a lot of beliefs and approaches that are so ingrained because they started when we were 3, 4, 5, figuring
Mhm.
out how to get love and attention in our
Yep.
house, at school. So just looking at like, oh yeah, okay, so this person has learned that they need to be a really good client
Yep.
to get help, or this person has learned, and we look at these things, and I think when they're a learned strategy, everything that is learned could be unlearned. Then we start to look at like, what do you want to hang on to? What's working for you? And what might you want to be changing?
Yeah. And this is where I will have that first conversation with children and teenagers, helping them immerse themselves in the therapeutic process. And helping them understand that I know what this feels like. The one question that I often pose is, hey, if a new student came into your classroom, are you automatically best friends with them? And obviously the answer is no. And I use that as a bridge in my start of the sessions to say, yeah, so I don't expect you to trust me right away, right? I'm a new person. You're a new person to me. But hopefully, just like with friends in the classroom, you see them more and more, you talk to them more and more, and they start to be your friend. And there's a sense of trust and to understand that there's a safe space here.
Yeah, I think I do that in a different way. I usually, like you were saying about being a little bit more anxious on the first visit. And I think most people getting into this profession want to help people, right? And so when I'm meeting someone for the first time, my instinct is to figure out how I can help them, right?
Yeah,
But sometimes that can kind of get me in trouble because I'm trying too hard, I'm working too hard. And
absolutely.
yeah, so I'll often tell people, check me out, ask me questions about my training, my background, like let's see if this is a good fit. And then I'm gonna, ease my way into it rather than I know I don't do good work when I'm trying too hard and doing a lot of psychoeducation and I need to sit back in my chair a little bit and allow the client to ask me and figure this out. And I like that you kind of already have some ways of slowing that down and framing it around this is a new meeting between two people, and I may not be able to help you right away.
Yep. I have had a bunch of supervisees, people going through graduate school, even new psychologists who I have supervised. And more often than not, the majority of people have this question early on in their career after maybe a couple of sessions with a client. It's not working. What can I do for this client? Right? They're not taking to these strategies. And my question, and it's sort of rhetorical, is how many sessions have you had? Psychology, again, it's not like taking medication. If you have a cold, you take medicine for a week and you're supposed to feel better. So build that connection with the client. And so much research has shown that the therapeutic alliance and empathy goes such a long way in helping people improve, at least within the psychology world.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. And the research actually shows it doesn't really matter what the therapist thinks the relationship is like. It matters what the client thinks the relationship is like. So you might think you have a great relationship, but it's really important to get a sense from the client. And I actually use a questionnaire that has 16 questions broken up into two categories: goals and bonds. So, how strong the bond is and how aligned or how much you feel like you're working on the same goals. There's a question of like, do I believe that my therapist likes me? And a lot of people have a hard time with that question and they don't know how to answer it and they don't want to but it's really important. I think if you're going to be vulnerable, if you're going to be sharing things with someone, it's nice to know that they actually like you and that they care about you and they're not just a computer spitting out strategies. It's a relationship.
And it goes back to empathy, right? Being able to show empathy, to show that you are truly listening. I've heard from a family before where the therapist was actually on their phone during the session. And it sort of blew my mind, because that goes against everything in terms of active listening, in terms of showing empathy, connecting with people. And during those first couple of sessions, that's what it's all about. Going back to the connection, building a therapeutic alliance. Do they like me? Having empathy to show that you care.
Yeah, yeah, actually that brings up I've noticed like over the years, just even through the men's group, seeing people over time and looking at like what is it that actually where people start to make positive changes or make improvements. This isn't hard science by any means, but what I've noticed is that when people start to believe that they're worth it, for whatever reason, for however that came about, it's like, I'm worth this. And then there's a lot of positive changes that happen when you feel like you're worth it. And I think when we give empathy, when we're trying to connect with someone and we're basically validating that, like, your feelings are worth me listening to, worth me trying to understand, and you are worth it, that message, it might not be like a therapeutic approach, but the message that someone feels like I am worth it, that I deserve help, that can be super important, especially if you come from a place where you don't feel like you're worth it, or you have a lot of these core beliefs that say I'm not good enough, or
Yeah, and it all really depends on who's coming into the office. And I think that's also goes into that very first session where sometimes in my mind, yeah, I'm scrambling a little bit because I am trying to make an evaluation, right? What is this person's use of language? What is their style? What is their nonverbal language? Right? What am I seeing in terms of how they're sitting? Are they sitting on the edge of the couch? Are they sitting on the edge of the chair? Are they laid back? Are they laying down right away? Is that socially appropriate? So trying to make those evaluations and seeing how I can adapt myself to what they need and what I'm seeing. And I think that goes to one of the biggest pieces I found as a therapist, having to be flexible to the needs of others and being able to adapt our style and even the therapeutic modality to what somebody needs.
absolutely. Yeah, I think all of the therapeutic approaches out there, and there's like 1,000 of them. So you will get overwhelmed if you're trying to look at for the perfect therapeutic approach. But that is the core of a lot of our training and a lot of our professional development. We're looking at kind of getting better or mastering a type of approach. And these approaches all come with a framework on how to make sense of what's going on with someone, or how to help someone, or help a family or a couple. So those frames are in our mind. And I think if we try to force them onto people, that is not going to work. So I know that I have several maps because I've been trained in different ways. And I'm looking like, what map helps me understand this person the best? And then I'm showing them the map and going like, does this map make sense to you? And if it does, then we know we can take a right turn or a left turn, and we know where we're going. And that is like, that sometimes can take multiple sessions.
So, Dave, let me ask you this then. Are we in agreement then that if someone is going to a therapist's office for the first time, and let's say that therapist is really pushing one style of therapy, and the client is sitting there going, why? Why is this person pushing just this one type of therapy? Should that person be cautious? Should the client be cautious?
Ooh, giving me hard questions. Yeah, this is a bit of a loaded question because there's two big movements in psychology and applied psychology and therapy, and one of them is evidence-based practice, right? And evidence-informed approaches. And so we want the science to, support what we're doing. And there are some specific types of therapy that have shown to be better than other types of therapy for specific issues, for specific populations. Quite often the research isn't as specific as the individual that's right in front of you, but you definitely, for an example, let's say PTSD and trauma, and EMDR is one of the approaches that I've been trained in. Some insurance companies will not pay for other types of therapy to treat PTSD trauma concerns. So, I have to start there because that's where the research is showing that, you better start with something that has been shown to work best or better, as, of course, with the caveat of applying that research to the specific individual right in front of you. Sometimes it's like, where do you start versus, do you have to do one approach? No, but I'm going to inform clients that, hey, this approach has been shown to be helpful for other people with concerns like yours. Does that fit for you? But I'm not pushing it on them. I'm not, unless the insurance company is saying that's what I have to do, then I'm letting them know that this is what I have to do because this is who's paying for it. But those are different, I think, than your question.
Yeah, I guess what I've found over the years, practicing for a long time now, you get the referrals where they say this person needs cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And yes, it's probably one of, if not the most researched modality over the last 4 decades, probably. So yeah, there's a ton of research out there, and yes, it can be very effective, but does it work for everyone? It doesn't. I can have very logical people sitting across from me, and I can be using CBT, going against their core constructs and talking about, modifying their thoughts and behaviors, and they'll just come back to me and say, I know that already. I know that already. So if I know it, why can't I get through this hard time? And so for me, it's like, okay, yeah, you're right. You know it already. You're very intelligent, very logical thinker, very rational. But the one thing I often find is that because of the strength in that logic, they've somehow ignored the emotions. So when you start talking about emotions, it's like, I've got nothing. That really then directs me, okay, let's be flexible here as a therapist. Let's try and tap into some of those emotions.
For sure. Yeah, I think, it reminds me of economics. And there was this idea that we were all rational human beings making rational decisions with our money and how we purchase things. And that's actually not true, right? So behavioral economics is trying to incorporate how people make irrational choices about things, and oftentimes that involves emotions, right? And so same thing with therapy. Just for those that aren't familiar with CBT, it's quite focused on thought process and changing thought processes and core beliefs. So it can be very like analytical, and the assumption is that if you change your thoughts, it'll change the way you feel. So if you're feeling depressed, you can look at some of the things that you're saying to yourself, the self-talk you have, the automatic thoughts you're having. But I love therapy because there's a lot of right ways. And at least for me, this is my personal opinion. I don't have the research to support it. I'm sure there's something out there. But if you feel different, if you feel less depressed, you actually think different too. Right?
Yeah.
Like they go together. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I'll show people the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors Venn diagram that CBT uses
Yep.
and let them know that different therapies will focus on different areas. And some of the more recent therapies focus on emotions. They're focused on having an experience in the therapy room that then translates into changes in thoughts, in behaviors, and that extends beyond the therapy session. And then one more thing about spirituality, I've added that to the middle of it. And it's something that I haven't been trained. In my training, it was kind of avoid religion and spirituality, but more and more looking at integrating and looking at how spirituality or religion can be a helpful, supportive aspect of someone's positive changes, or maybe something that is kind of a limiting aspect of the changes they want to make. So, and then finally, there's always the past, present, future.
Yep.
And so the therapeutic approaches, they'll vary in terms of focusing more on the past, more on the present, the mindfulness approaches, and then more on the future and where do you want to go. So with that, all of a sudden you can have 1,000 different approaches that
Oh, for sure. And that's why with a lot of therapies, you hear a different name, you see different research, but therapies build on other types of therapies. It's not just like somebody thinks of a completely brand new way of going about therapy. Nowadays, doesn't happen very often, right? Someone is building, repackaging, to make therapy more digestible in today's age, for example.
you said repackaging, and that's my cynical side is, rebranding and, having different names for the same things. And
Yes.
yes.
We'll leave it there for now. With regards to I know we spoke a little bit more about emotions, and for anyone listening who is new to therapy, you may find this whole ideas of sharing emotions, sharing feelings to be quite uncomfortable. And we totally get it. And it is our job, I believe our job, to help people feel comfortable enough so that in due time they may be able to share some emotion. Because, like we talked about, those three pillars, right? In the cognition, in the emotions, and the behaviors, they're so intertwined. It's so hard to ignore one of those pillars. But for those who are really struggling with understanding their emotions, finding that therapist who you connect with is so vital so that you feel safe to explore those pieces together.
Yeah, I don't I'm not as focused on the emotions. I'm often thinking like you're saying about safe and to be yourself, to be able to just this is who I am, this is what I've done, what I'm trying to do. And the more honest you can be in therapy, generally the more helpful it'll be. And I know that so many issues, so many concerns, so many ways that people struggle, it's related to shame, right? And
Yep.
that shame,
Yep.
that feeling like they are a bad person because of something that happened to them or something that they've done or something that they are. And if we can eliminate some of that from the therapy, then we can start to well, who are you and what do you want to do and how do you want to heal? And I think about addictions a lot. Addictions is one place where shame is quite often there. And sometimes the approach is to actually shame people more for what they're doing and to punish them for their behavior. And that actually pushes them further down that path. And, people, I think a lot of people don't recognize how hard people are on themselves with addictions, how self-critical, and that they're already beating themselves up. They don't need another
Yep.
person to beat them up to feel better, which seems counterintuitive, right? Like we have these labels on smoke packages that say like this is what your lungs will be if you keep smoking, and this kind of fear-based way of trying to change behavior.
I was actually going to start talking a little bit more about the other side. I think we focused a lot on working with adults. Um, but as you were talking about those different approaches, um, I was also reflecting on how different do I start that first session with children and teenagers, where, if you take that very empathic and compassionate approach with some children, and we see all types of children. I would say that my practice right now is probably 75% kids, 25% adults. But yeah, if you sometimes take that very compassionate approach almost to a point of seemingly boring, you're going to lose it with the kids. So going back to that ability to be playful, being able to connect, have a joke or two, right? One of the things I always say is, "Oh, how old are you?" To a 5-year old, it's like, "You must be like 10." Right? And they'll give you this look like, "Are you serious?" And just being a bit playful with that first session. And for me, it's not even really tapping into too much about their lives yet. We'll have conversations, but what's the best route to work with kids is to show them that you can get down to their level. You can draw, you can play, you can have a board game, and that's your connection right there.
I'm just listening to you talk, and I think if we were in the same town, I'd be wanting to send my kids to go see you. So you were saying that like what do you do or how do you start with a kid? And actually at our office, we start with the parents, right? And so if you're thinking of taking your kid to
Yeah.
therapy,
Yes.
just recognizing that the kids often didn't sign up for this, they didn't ask for it. Maybe some have, but oftentimes it's the parents saying, my child needs help with
Yep.
this. And so we get a good idea of what the parents are hoping for, why the parents are
Yes.
bringing their kids in. And
Yep.
then when I'm meeting with the kids, it's like, hey, did you want to be here? And then I'm starting there. And then I'm asking, like, well, this is what your parents have told me. This is what they've said is happening at home or at school. And so it's a very different approach than an adult showing up because they want to be there for themselves.
Oh, for sure. I love the looks I get, especially when I ask anyone between, I don't know, 13 and 17. And I go, did you want to come today? And I tell them there's no right answer. And I get it if you don't want to be here. The looks I get are astonishing. Sometimes I get the eye roll. Sometimes I get the polite head nod, but you can tell like they're reluctantly nodding. But it's a lot of fun. But I think again though, it's that building that bridge right off the hop. It's like I'm making it safe for you. Tell me you don't want to be here. That's okay. Right?
Yeah.
But give me a shot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, using humor and making it safe. Sometimes I'll joke and tell them like I'm not a spy for your parents, right? Because they're wondering like how much are you going to tell my parents about what I
Exactly.
say? Can I say what I want? And so being really clear about what are the limits to confidentiality and what will be shared
Yes.
with parents and what won't be. Lots of times I bring parents into the office with the child so they can hear what
Yep.
the parent is telling me. And then the parent leaves the room. And then I say, what do you think about that? Your mom just said this or your dad just said this. So try to be as much transparent as I can, especially with the teenagers that are like, what are you going to do to me?
I think we operate very similarly. To your point about working with parents, half the time I would say is building rapport with the family, with the caregivers, and trying to understand what their goals are. And not even just that, it's okay, so we worked on a few things. Can you, as the adult, as the caregiver, now implement it? Because I can't expect an 8-year-old to go home and do everything on their own now. It's impossible. Right? So what are the caregivers' capacity now to do this at home? Right? So being able to do that, and oftentimes I will have, if it's age appropriate, some parent sessions thrown in there just to ensure that we're all on the same page and that we're building a strong alliance here to work together to help their child or their children.
Oh man, I was talking about shame earlier. I'm feeling a bit of that. We did my wife and I we did the triple P parenting course and
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
applying the reward, strategies, the reward charts. You start out really motivated and it's like, yes, we're going to do this thing. It's going to change our house and we're going to have a more peaceful, cooperative house. And then yeah, it's hard to keep up with some of these things and it can kind of trail off and then you're not actually doing the things that you know are helpful because life gets busy and so yeah, having that ongoing kind of checking in with someone can be really helpful too. It's like, how's it going? If you're not doing it, what's going on? Like what's getting in the way of actually doing this thing that you said you wanted to do? And even with individual therapy, it's the same thing. It's you come up with ideas of things that'll be helpful and then it doesn't happen. And then you follow up at the next session and go, hey, you didn't do the thing that you said you were going to do. What's up?
Yep. And I have heard of therapists who, again, this is just coming anecdotally from families where they've seen somebody else and they will say, oh, I don't know what happens in the session. My child goes in, they come back out, and we leave. But for me, that's never been my style. Again, going back to my point of how can I expect a young child to follow through on strategies and not keep parents in the loop? I think it's impossible to work well, using that method.
Especially if something needs to change in the environment, right? Kids don't get to make those decisions. So you need
Yeah.
to involve the people that can actually make those changes. And that often is parents and teachers and other adults.
Yep. Yep. I will occasionally have meetings with the schools as well, after all the consent forms have been signed. Um, but again, yeah, it's making change to the environment. And it's sometimes even nice to see, okay, what is the style of that teacher? And you're now really taking into consideration the child's entire environment, not just home, not just school, but all of these different areas that the child has to adapt to over time. If listeners haven't caught on yet, we're both parents. And it really does give me a new appreciation of things that parents go through, and they get to my office and understand what it's like to be a busy parent, to have to go to work and juggle everything at the same time.
Yeah, even if I haven't experienced it myself, there's a level of like we're all in this soup together and we're trying to figure this out. And there's a metaphor from I think like John Kabat-Zinn or something that says like, we're climbing our own mountain, but my view of your mountain from my mountain can be helpful to you. And that approach I think is quite nice, even though we might not have the exact same experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, we live in Canada, so for those who don't know, hockey is a huge sport here. And one thing I found, it's such a simple thing to say, but we all sort of have this head nod when I talk to parents. When I say, "Oh, let me check my schedule, see if that works. I need to check my children's hockey schedule." And you just sort of get this smirk and nod. It's like, I get it. I have to check our hockey schedule too. Just little things like that, little tidbits just helps again, that connection, just going back to that connection, that alliance you form. And it's not to say that, hockey is just an example, but lots of little things that can just make that therapeutic connection a little bit stronger.
We could talk about this forever, and we're kind of going between individual, adults, child psychology. But for people starting out that have never done this before and they're wondering, like, how many sessions, how long is this going to take? What do you find?
Well, I think for people who don't know, typically therapeutic sessions are an hour long. Sometimes with the intake, so like the very first session, I might go to an hour and a half. But again, I think typically I've honed my craft enough where I think I can do it within the hour nowadays. And then when I do get that question about length of time, I will let people know that perhaps we start with 4 to 6 sessions. And even after the first couple, we can reevaluate, do we feel that there's a connection? Is there a therapeutic rapport that you feel comfortable enough to continue? And then sometimes people will just weed themselves out too. I think inherently people are nice. So if they don't feel like that they have a connection with you, they'll kindly just say, you know what? Um, just not in the mood for therapy right now. It's not my thing. And I always tell people I'm not going to get insulted. I'm not going to get offended if you don't want to come back. At the end of the day, it has to benefit you and you have to feel comfortable.
Yeah, I'm with you. I often tell people like you don't have to take care of me. That this relationship, the way this is set up, it's my job to help you. And so I just want to be able to help you find the help you need. And whether that's me or somebody else, I'm not going to be offended. But I do know that so many clients just won't come back, right? They just disappear and you
Yep.
never get the feedback. You don't know if they got better, if they're feeling great, or if they didn't like the therapy. So that is one of the reasons why I do the questionnaire that I do. If people want to do it, it's voluntary, but it gives me a bit of a heads up if we're kind of going off track, even if we started really well and then things are not working out, then we can have that conversation like, how are we doing? Is this helpful? And then do we need to meet more often or less often? What would that mean for you? So it's an ongoing dialogue.
Yep. I'm always very open-minded to the fact that, you know, people who might want to start may not come back after the first session, after the third session, whatever it is. And whether or not they want to disclose, that's up to them. Everybody has their life situation. But what I've also found is that we, at this clinic anyway, at my clinic, we get a lot of people who will 6 months, a year down the road. I think yesterday it was like 3 years down the road, somebody called back and said, "Hey, I want to go with therapy again." They really only just came for, I think, 3 sessions 3 years ago. So that always shows me that, look, everybody has their life situation, and maybe therapy is just not the thing right now. That's okay. Right? When you're ready, you'll know.
For sure. And I think, when do you know you're done? When do you know you want to come back? What, like, those are great questions. And yeah, same thing. I get people now that I've been doing this for about a decade. It's, you have people you haven't seen for 5 years and they come back and they fill you in on what happened in the last 5 years, and you pick up where you left off. But yeah, it is sometimes daunting to think like, how much money am I going to spend? How much time is this going to take? But we know from some of the research with like the solution focused type of approaches that people are making changes when they call in and book that first appointment. Even before they show up to therapy, they could already
Yep,
be making changes and doing positive things for themselves. So I never underestimate, even just having one session with someone might be enough for where they're at now. And
absolutely.
yeah, the momentum nonprofit organization that I'm connected with, they do a lot of solution focused approach. And a rough estimate, some of the stats are like a third of the people just need that one session when they needed it in that crisis, and they're good for a while. Another third need like, 3 sessions to 5 sessions of follow-up sessions, and then they're kind of good for right now. And then a third need to be referred to more long-term approaches.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
just kind of thinking which third you might fit in.
I think it's like you said, a very reflective process. And as I see clients making changes, and let's say they're in a much better place, I will talk about pausing. Do we take a pause or do we take a longer time in between the next session? So it's a reflective process, it's something to be discussed with the therapist. And I always tell clients too, if I don't hear back from you and I think we've done some really good work, I'm glad I'm not hearing from you.
All right, Andrew, I'm going to throw you a curveball here. Personal experience with therapy. Have you had any personal experiences that you would share with the listeners that might be helpful for someone? I'm comfortable if you want to throw it back at me.
Yeah, I've gone to therapy myself before. I think back in the day when I moved out to Edmonton actually, it was a big change. Didn't really know anyone out there, right? And moving across the country, I was in a relationship with now my wife. But yeah, it was a big change. I think it was a bit of a struggle at the beginning. And so I did seek out a therapist out in Edmonton. I would say it was a good experience. I think doing what I do, probably this is why I chose the profession. I'm a talker. I can talk. So I just felt like it gave me a safe space to unload whatever my stressors were, however I was feeling. And it was, that was my first foray into therapy. I think growing up in a Chinese household, at that time in the 90s, early 2000s, it wasn't really a thing that parents would send their kids to, right? Especially, thinking of a place where you quote unquote air your dirty laundry. It's just you just don't do that, right? So my parents would have never even considered that. However, going into this profession, it was really nice to be on the flip side and making that decision myself to do it. Right. It wasn't guided by anybody else other than maybe, yeah, some of my education, but it was that self decision to go.
Yeah, I'm always surprised at how parallel our lives have been, even though we come from different parts of the country and different cultural backgrounds. As a boy growing up in the small town that I grew up in, there was no therapy. It wasn't even on my radar. I think a lot of times the stigma around if you're going to therapy or if you have to talk to someone, something's really wrong with you. So you just figure out how to do it on your own. But through my training and education program, I was like, oh man, like, why do I have to do this on my own? Why, like, maybe I could also experience this that I'm getting trained to like help other people with. So I tried it, and it actually didn't have the best experience initially. But through more of my training, I found a great psychologist in the city here. And shout out to my psychologist, you know who you are. And I do monthly appointments right now, and it's my time to focus on myself, right? And I really look forward to those appointments, and I'm generally, better in my family, in my home, in my community, in my work when I have those appointments. So,
I think that's the parting message is that when someone decides to go to therapy, it should feel like it's your time. whether it's a comfortable or uncomfortable time, because, it could be things that you're talking about in the session that may create some discomfort. At the end of the day, the focus is on you.
Yes. And if you grew up in a way where you were not like, I often joke with clients that an hour or 50 minutes can feel like a long time if you're not used to being the focus on you, right? So just be gentle with yourself and ease your way into it. I think hopefully you've got enough insight into a little bit of therapy, how we might do therapy to inform your decision making. But I also think trying it, you can learn about it by reading about it, by talking about it, but you can learn about it by just trying it. And often word of mouth referrals, asking someone else who they've seen or who they've had a good experience with, that can help narrow it down. Or just reading profiles on like something like Psychology Today and seeing with a picture and a bit of a profile who might resonate with you, who might you feel like you could connect with and try something with.
So much of it is word of mouth, and just as a word of caution, just because one therapist seemed to fit with a friend or family member doesn't necessarily mean it's going to fit with you, and that's okay. This is where you keep doing your research, and eventually there will be somebody who connects well. This is a big world, and we will find somebody. So we hope that we have given you enough insight into what therapy is all about, what the start of therapy can look like. And, for those who are thinking of starting therapy, perhaps giving you a bit of confidence in moving forward. We can spend so much more time talking about this, and we probably will circle back in the future. But send us your questions if you have any, and we can definitely bring it up in future episodes. And until next time, take good care.
Yeah, you are worth getting therapy. Take care.